Welcome to Permission to Be Human, the podcast. I'm your host, Mel Findlater, mother, coach, and curator of Permission to Be Human, the company and community. If you're a mom, know a mom, or want to be a mom, and you crave getting out in the world to make a difference, then you're in the right place. This is a space for moms like you to connect with yourself, your purpose, and your big, audacious dreams. Because when you feel your best, you can better you, your family, and the wider world. Let's do this. Hello, everyone. You've got me today, and just me, here to tell you a little bit about an experience that I had recently, an act of courage, a challenge that I took on for myself, and the interesting things that I learned from it. Basically, I went off into the trees near my house for 8.5 hours, from 8:30 in the morning basically until 5 o'clock at night. I was going to stay until it got dark, which was more like 6:37. But honestly, I felt like I had what I needed at that point in time and I was ready to go home. So I went off into the trees. Firstly, why the heck did I do this? And why maybe, if this is something that intrigues you, you might want to. Well, I'm actually doing a challenge this coming weekend, which I will have completed by the time this podcast comes out. So I will do an episode on it as well. But I'm going to be spending 24 hours alone in the wilderness with the collective support of the group that I am part of called The Fire Within. And we're having kind of a rite of passage in taking this time solo in the wild, quote unquote. It's actually on someone's land, so it's, kind of a sheltered wild, but it's like 40 acres, right? So there's space where I'll be able to go by myself and, not really interact with other people. And I'm going out there, and I have to say, so I live on Vancouver Island in Canada, and I grew up on the mainland near Vancouver, much more of a city type girl, small city. And I came over to Vancouver Island and went to the University of Victoria and, loved it there, but didn't really have a car. So I didn't spend a lot of time in wilderness. Then I went to the UK and lived there for 14 years. Now, the UK is a whole nother type of nature, right? You don't have these evergreen forests that are, some of them like hundreds of years old. You have instead, I lived in the Fens, which is basically a flat land that they drained to be land. Very flat, not very hilly, not a lot of trees. You could drive about an hour and a half and get to the ocean and have some beaches as well, but not being able to see anyone was actually really challenging. So then I had gotten into sleeping out. I even had my little girl at the time. We went wild camping and would sleep outside, first in the backyard and then elsewhere, just in a bivvy, which is basically means you sleep in your sleeping bag with a little like waterproof thing over top of it so that the dew doesn't get you. And I was like happy as could be. That was a great first step act of courage for me. Well, there was multiple steps before that, but a step. Because there's no predators there, right? So maybe a deer might sniff my head, or a hedgehog might wiggle its way along, or a badger, right? There's no, I felt safe. I felt safe in that environment. And then we moved back to Vancouver Island, and I suddenly realized, and this was height of COVID, so anxiety was already peaking anyways. And it really showed up in the fact that there are cougars and bears potentially in the trees literally across the street from where I'm looking right now. And they are there sometimes, they're not there all the time, but they are there sometimes. And my nervous system said, whoa, what are you talking about? You are not going to go out there. And I think especially because I'm a mom, I've got the mama bear mentality. I've got to protect. And yeah, it was really a sign of the anxiety that I still held and still hold. So that's kind of just a backstory, really. into how big a deal this was for me to just go out during the day. The idea is if I go out in the day from the morning to evening, then I get to practice and learn, some stuff about myself before I try to go and do it for 24 hours. Because let's face it, the concept of being by myself in the dark, in the wild, is freaking terrifying, right? And before I did this last week in the daytime, I was like, I honestly don't know if I could do it. I did come up with like safety plans. We have a space we can go back to if we need to, where the facilitators are. We actually have a warm lodge we can go to now, etc. But I was shitting myself, let's be honest. And yeah, so I needed to go out on this day and prove to myself that that was possible. So that's what I did. I got up, I helped get the kids ready for school. I asked my husband to take them, and I headed out the door and walked into the trees. I am so grateful and so honored to say that I can do that here. Like, I'm surrounded by these woods. And if I walk in for a while, then I'm highly unlikely to run into a person, especially during midweek. It was a Wednesday daytime. So I packed my backpack. I got some warm stuff, something to sit on. I packed this hammock tent that I had purchased that's like flat on the bottom, thinking that I was going to be using it for the overnight. So I'd practice putting it up. And I brought my knife along, and no food, by the way. I ate in the morning. I had a protein shake, and then I just fasted for the rest of that day. And that actually helped me with the predator thing, I have to say. I was wondering what my blood sugars would do, but they were fine. And I felt so much better because I'm like, why would a animal want me if there's no food in my bag? Anyway, so I headed off and I walked for about 2.5 hours, stopping here and there to look around, listen. I sang a lot and made all sorts of noises. And here's the thing. I spent that first 2.5 hours literally like listening to every little sound that I heard and thinking, what is that? Right? Is it a predator? Is it a bear? Is it a cougar? Is it an eagle? Is it a squirrel? What is that sound? And it's also fall or autumn for those countries that call it that. So actually there's a lot of like leaves falling out of the trees and the bits of wind. So there's lots of little sounds. And I spent that first 2.5 hours feeling like that. And then eventually I got to this space in the woods there was a bluff. So basically that's like a very large rock, often with moss and such on top. Very, very common in the woods here. But it goes, it's up a bit because it's on it's a hill of rock essentially. And I went up and sat on the first one and I was like, oh, my nervous system likes it up here, which I think is fascinating, right? Like, what are my instincts telling me that I'm somehow safer up high? And then, so I sat there, I read a book a little bit, and I just kind of let myself be. And I looked around and I saw this massive arbutus tree. Like, I think it's probably like the grandmother of arbutuses. Now, if you don't know what an arbutus tree is, I highly recommend you go and Google it. They are such beautiful trees. They are my favorite thing of all times. They really feel like home when I'm near them. They're wiggly and have this red bark that peels off. And that's meant to happen. They're just absolutely stunning with these kind of, I can't describe what the leaves are, but they're not sharp edge. They're like round edge leaves. And they're just really, really beautiful things. And they're often growing in like the weirdest of places that you think a tree shouldn't grow. So I saw this one not too far away, but a little bit of a walk away. And I was like, that's where I need to go. So I picked up my stuff, put my backpack back on, and wandered through these, like down the bluff, down through the woods a little bit, and then found this other bluff, headed back up, and I was like, oh, there's the tree. There's the arbutus. And it was stunning, absolutely beautiful. And I sat underneath it for I don't even know how long because I wasn't looking at a watch and I wasn't looking at my phone. But I sat there and just kind of looked at it for a while. I found a little nook that I could kind of like lean against and, help my back out. And then I pulled out my journal for a while and just kind of like sat there and reflected for a bit. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go and set up my tent. Now, there's not really going to be like evergreens growing out of a rock, right? A bluff. So I went down the bluff a bit, and then right at the bottom, there was a couple of trees that were perfect for putting up a hammock. So I started doing that, paused a bit, decided I wanted to like go up and around to the other bluff to see what was on the other side. Did that a little bit. Came back, finished putting up the hammock tent, which is a little more than just hanging something off a tree because there was a few different hooks because it's meant to be like a flat bottom one with like a tarp. And I laid in that for a while. Now, let me tell you, I didn't really like the flat hammock, I have to say. So I actually have gone out and got myself I can't find the one that I had for years. So I found a hammock tent that's more like a hammock that kind of like snuggles you on the bottom, that has a mosquito net on it, and I'll put a tarp above. But the one that I practiced on this day was flat, and I laid there, wiggled around as I needed to for a while, and I journaled, and I just like closed my eyes and listened and reflected and started to think about a couple of things. So the first is how we define the word wild. Like, what comes to mind when I say wild, right? In our culture, and things like unsafe, out of control. They're generally things that like don't make you want it, right? When we talk about wild, it's like scary stuff, right? Even like if we're saying like a wild child, they're like out of control, and there is a bit of freedom there. So we do touch on that as well. But there is this kind of underlying element of, the wilderness being scary. And I just kind of sat with that for a while. And I started asking myself, knowing that our brains love questions and love being curious, I started asking myself the question, what if wild is safe? And I, again, would say it over and over again. What if wild was safe? And, these images came to my mind, and of this like, a bear coming and noticing me and just being like, like, oh, or like maybe curious, but not really like, coming at me. Like, why would they? And just, this concept of wild being a safe place for me. And it was really interesting. Once you ask yourself a question, there's a huge trick for you, by the way. If I had just done like an affirmation of some sort and said, wild is safe, my brain's going, no, it ain't. It is not. I have years of programming telling me that you are wrong, right? However, if I say, what if wild is safe? My brain goes, oh, interesting. And it starts imagining it. It starts imagining wild being safe. And suddenly my body is going, oh, I'm safe. Interesting, right? Because our brains also don't know the difference between reality and imagination. So I'm sitting there and starting to finally feel like I'm safe. And then I start reflecting on this fact that wild is actually totally in control if you think about it. Like, if you think about the way things grow and the way animals interact with each other, they are following way more laws, if you want to put it that way, than we are, right? They are like, I only eat what I need to eat. I'm not going to go and kill every single thing I see. They're growing where they need to grow. They're resilient. They are, living harmoniously together. And that is kind of the opposite of what wild often means in our culture. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. And again, I would be like, what if wild was safe? What if wild was safe? And so I reflected and reflected. And then I came to this realization. So then, like, the second big realization is like, it's my ego. It's 100% ego talking when I say or think that any animal that might fall upon me in these woods, would it be at all interested in me? Why would they be? This is their home. I'm in their space. But they're not, they don't just attack for the hell of it. Like, they are there just living their lives. And now if I go and scare them, don't get me wrong. Like, if I jump out or like try to steal their kid, they're gonna protect themselves. But it's only ego that is saying that any animal would give a crap that I'm even in there, right? Like, why would they? It doesn't make any sense. So that's kind of the key learnings that I had while I was out there. And they were like revolutionary in my mind. Like, the rest of the time I was out there, I felt so much safer and more curious. And if I had seen an animal, ideally from a distance, then I would have still had those little palpitations that you're going to get. And I would have had this sense of curiosity, like, oh, I can handle myself in that time. Now, here's the fascinating part. So eventually I started walking back, and it was only like probably just after lunch. And once I had these realizations, I was kind of like almost bored. Like, I was like, oh, now what do I do? And I had little stints of this throughout the day. I'd have kind of do something for an hour, and then I'd be like, oh, I don't know what to do next. Instead of just being, right? Like, that was a huge part of the practice as well, is just learning to be. And, I had my knife, I carved some wood, I did some stuff, but eventually I was like, whatever. And then also I realized, like, I wanted to be closer to home as it got later in the day, so that I knew, well, firstly, I totally forgot to bring a flashlight or a lantern or anything. So I was like, okay, I want to be where I know where I am and I'm safe, because I know I can safely get back from there. So I wandered back through these things, and I found this bluff. Humorously, I didn't find it. I knew where it was. So I aimed to go up to this, knowing that clearly I enjoy bluffs. And I was up high, and it was surrounded by this beautiful, like, micro forest of arbutus trees, like little ones. And I laid down on this bluff in the sun for I don't even know how long, and fell asleep at one point. Like, I don't think I was over for very long, but I was dozing in and out, and I was kind of just being in more of a meditative state, I suppose. I read a book for a little while. I journaled for a little while. I drew what I saw for a little while in a very doodly type form. And I felt safe, right? I felt like, oh, this is beautiful. I can do this. Like, but as I was walking by, here's the part I was getting to. I was walking back to that space, and while I started to feel safe with nature, suddenly that realization that nature is more organized in many ways than humans are. I actually started fearing humans more, which has never been what I did when I'm alone. But I did have to walk through some land, which I happen to know is not private land, but has lots of signs claiming it is private land because ATVs go through there. But I had to go through there, and like I'm all like, my nervous system is jittery again, but it wasn't for animals. And I almost laughed, basically, right? Because I went from going into the wild fearing the animals to starting to move through and out of the wild fearing the humans. And while I would say that it was a natural level of fear there, it is an interesting one. And I was fine, and I made it through, and I laid in that bluff, and eventually I was like, I could lay out here for a couple more hours. There's plenty that I could find for myself to do, but I kind of felt complete, and wanted to be with my family to have dinner and just enjoy their company again. So I wandered back up. out of the woods and into my house to this beautiful family. And my husband had already known he was making dinner, and I didn't have to do a lot, and it was a nice transition back into reality as well. So I just wanted to share what that was like for me. And like I said, I've got a 24-hour one coming up. It is not warm here, and I will be cold that night. And there's a lot of, fear around that in many people who are doing it. And I have a little bit of that, more just an uncomfortable kind of feeling, not really fear. But I did this 8 hours, and I can't tell you how happy I am that I did. It was absolutely exactly what I needed. And I would suggest that maybe you try it too. You don't have to go for 8 hours. Maybe you just start and go. If you don't know what a sit spot is, look up what a sit spot is. Okay. There's lots of ways to be in that space, but basically go find a space in nature and be with it. And ideally it's one you can go back to in different seasons. Maybe it's a tree that you happen to like. Maybe it's, sitting next to a lake or water. Maybe it could be literally in your backyard, but you notice. It's a practice of noticing while you're out there. And this is like an 8 hours of noticing what I'm feeling, noticing what's around me. Whenever I was feeling quite anxious, what I did do, my regulating practice was to notice what was around me and name some of the things that I saw, as well as actually I sang them because I figured that would keep the bears away. And it just felt right. And yeah, so you can go and spend first 20 minutes, then half an hour, then an hour, and build it up. But I highly, highly recommend giving it a go. Whatever your version of wild is, and it can be less wild at the beginning, right? It depends where you live, how wild you can get. I would say it's a space of silence, not necessarily that you have to be silenced, but you're not speaking to other people. Ideally, you can't see other people. That's the ideal. But if you do, just ignore them. Go out and see what happens, because I feel totally different afterwards. And I'm actually, I'm still both excited and scared for the weekend to come with the 24 hours. I am so intrigued by what I'm going to get out of having that time alone. And, I've been starting up. We've got our initial founding members of the Courage Club for Women here on Vancouver Island, which will eventually spread, by the way. But I'm always talking about what acts of courage have you taken this week, this month, noticing the ones that you do, and also what challenge are you putting in place for yourself. And this one has come exactly at the right time for me. And it's faster than I thought I would. I would say I would not have chosen to do it in the fall when it's going to be cold, potentially raining, all these things. And it's getting me into doing it. It's stretched me. It's not in my red zone. I'm not in beep, 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 backup zone. I am in full on stretch zone for sure. On the outside of it too. But I'm good with that because I've gone and done this 8 hours alone in the wild. So I hope that was interesting to you. Very much storytelling today. But I really think that, there's something in the nature element of this, and there's also something in the being alone part of this, without a phone to distract us, without technology. I actually came away, one of the things I wrote in my journal was, maybe once a week I just have a day without tech, and how beautiful would that be? Maybe a weekend day, just leave my phone at home, right? It would be, that was a big part of it, is getting over the temptation to go and look at something, but actually to just sit there and be, right? That was probably one of the hardest parts and most useful parts of what I did. So, I challenge you, what's your challenge? What act of courage do you want to do in the next month or so? And could it be some time alone? Could it be without technology? Could it be something in the wild? What is it? What is your act of courage that you want to take to get yourself building up that muscle, It doesn't mean you're not scared. I was scared shitless, let's be honest, going in there. And I just took fear along. I just took it along, right? Like I said, I wasn't in my red. I wasn't like in panic zone. But I said, okay, we're going to do this. Come on, like put my arm around Fear's shoulders and said, you can come along. We're all right. We can do this together. And, whether it's any of these things I've mentioned, go out and practice an act of courage. Do it intentionally and notice the ones that you've already done. Like step 1, think about today or this week and think about what act of courage have you done this week, because I guarantee you have done one. And that means you're building up your muscle. Courage is a muscle. We just do teeny tiny little things to convince our brain and show our brain that we can do the hard things, that it's okay that we're afraid, right? And the more we do that, then the slightly bigger and slightly bigger things become less scary because we know we've got this, right? So notice the things that you're already doing. Notice your acts of courage, and then think about what your challenge or your act of courage could be in the next month or two. All right. Thank you so much for listening in. I hope it was helpful, and we'll be back to speak to you really soon. If you live on Vancouver Island, then listen up. This is for you. And if you don't, still listen up, because it may well eventually be for you. I have started the Courage Club. It is up and running right now with our founding members, and it will be launching for real in January of 2025. And it is a space for women to meet new people local in their area and try new things, build up that courage muscle, take fear along for the ride, and have some fun together. And if that seems like something that you are craving, that space to get out and do things that you might not otherwise do on your own, but that you do want to do, then you can do it with the Courage Club. Now, courage shows up in many forms. Sure, there's the physical ones that we all think of, but there's also social, and there's emotional courage, and there's so many ways that we can show it. So you will have an opportunity to decide how you're going to do your acts of courage. Head on over to permissiontobehuman.ca/the Courage Club and get your name on the waiting list so that you can hear all about it as and when it comes up. That is it, folks. This has been Mel Findlater on Permission to Be Human, the podcast, and I am so glad that you have joined us here today, and hope that you have taken away some tidbits that will help you go away, connect with your big audacious dream, and make that massive impact in the world that you are dying to make. If you liked today's episode, please, please, please like it, share it. Think of one person that you think would also like it, and send it on over to them. Let's get this out there, and more moms feeling like themselves, inspired, dreaming big, and out there being them. Please do head on over to find me on Facebook with Permission to Be Human, or Instagram, or you can even pop me an email and say hello at permissiontobehumanalways@gmail.com. Say hello and let me know that you listened. What did you like about it? I would love to hear. If you didn't like it, I don't really want to know. Just kidding. You can share that if you want. I would love to know, however, who you are. Let's connect. Let's find out what you want more of. I want to hear from you, and I want to make it what would be useful to you. As always, remember that you have permission to dream big, permission to feel big, and permission to be you. You have complete and full permission to be human. For real, you do.